In 1997, 5 young musicians vanished without a trace after leaving a bar gig. No crash, no calls, just silence swallowed by cornfields. The only man who could have saved them, their driver, Eli Collins, overdosed behind the wheel, sealing them inside a van that no one thought to search for years. But nearly a decade later, a stubborn rookie investigator asked the one question everyone else had missed and aimed her shovel where no one else dared. What they unearthed would not only bring the band home, it would finally expose the tragic truth buried just beneath the surface. The night air was sticky with July heat as the last chords of the encore faded into applause. It was Saturday, July 26, 1997, and the indie rock band Chalk River had just wrapped their set at Brewdog's Tap Room in Meridian, Iowa, a backwater town of 1-800 nestled among endless cornfields. The weather report at 10:45 p.m. clocked the temperature at 82 degrees with 71% humidity, sweltering even after sunset. By 11:12 p.m., they had packed up one 1979 Dodge Ram van, matte black with flame decals, 2 amps, 1 drum kit, and 4 bandmates. Denny Cross, the frontman, Mark Slim Fallon, lead guitar, Jacob Gelman on drums, and Ty Sims, the bassist. The fifth was their part-time roadie and driver, Eli Stitch Collins, age 28, recently out of rehab and on probation for possession. The van was seen pulling out of the parking lot at 11:27 p.m., heading northbound on County Route 6, toward the cheap motel they'd booked in Canton, 14 miles away. That was the last confirmed sighting. At 2:03 a.m., Mark Fallon's fiancée, Renee Halpern, called his pager. No answer. By sunrise, 3 families were calling one another. By 7:46 a.m., Renee dialed 911. Meridian County 911, what's your emergency? They never came back. The van. They were supposed to be home by 1. Who's they, ma'am? My fiancé and his band. 4 of them. They left Brewdog's around 11:30. And you haven't heard from any of them? No, none of them answer. I paged 3 times. Ty's mom says his wallet's still at her place. Something's wrong. The dispatcher logged the call and immediately flagged a bolo, be on the lookout, for a black 1979 Dodge van, Iowa plate 7KX3D2. Officers in Meridian, Canton, and Garber Township were alerted. A brief sweep of County Route 6 showed no signs of a breakdown, accident, or turnoff. Yet between the empty road and 18 miles of flat farmland, the van had somehow vanished. Unanswered question. If the van never reached the motel, why was there no crash reported? No tire marks? No glass? The sun rose high by 10 a.m., 93-degree Canaris already. Searchers feared dehydration, even a heat stroke accident. But that didn't explain the silence from 5 men, nor why all pagers and cell signals had gone dead after 11:30. The band's gig pay, $250 cash, was never deposited. None of the men used their bank accounts again. The van, and every soul inside, seemed to have dissolved into the corn. Cliffhanger. That afternoon, a Canton deputy found 1 shoe, a Converse size 12, off the road near a rusted gate. No prints, no blood, just the shoe, facing toward the cornfield. It belonged to Ty Sims. By sunrise on Sunday, July 27, 1997, the disappearance of 5 young men, all members of the indie rock band Chalk River, had escalated from confusion to full-scale panic. Less than 36 hours earlier, they'd played a packed set at Brewdog's Tap Room in Meridian, Iowa, and were last seen driving northbound on County Route 6 toward a motel in Canton. A 911 call made at 7:46 a.m. by Mark Fallon's fiancée triggered immediate concern. The call, logged as entry WL1277A, was brief but alarming. She reported that none of the band members had returned home, and all of them had gone completely dark. No pages answered, no voicemails returned. Deputies quickly issued a bolo for a black 1979 Dodge van with flame decals and Iowa plate 7KX3D2. A 10-mile search grid was drawn up using USGS topographic maps, focusing on points where an off-road crash could be obscured by terrain, abandoned irrigation lanes, disused farm roads, and culverts choked by corn stalks. Meridian County's terrain, deceptively flat to outsiders, was riddled with elevation dips, sand pockets, and field access cuts invisible from the highway. The first physical clue came early. Ty Sims's shoe, a size 12 Converse, was found near a rusted fence gate on the edge of a cornfield, standing upright, facing toward the rows. No scuff marks, no drag lines, no sign of struggle. "It's like it was placed there," Deputy Lyle Roush radioed back after inspecting the site at 7:41 a.m. At 10:22 a.m., a Cessna 172 was dispatched for a low-altitude flyover of the surrounding countryside. Pilot Tom Avery scanned the patchwork quilt of green below, but reported no vehicle silhouette, no reflective glass, no sign of a wreck. "It's like hiding a needle in a field of needles," he later told local reporters. At 3:14 p.m., a new lead came through the 911 line. A man claimed to have seen the band's van veer suddenly off a dirt road near the DeWitt silo access lane around midnight. "Headlights vanished real sudden," he said, but there'd been no crash sound, no screams, just a sharp swerve in darkness. Field Team Bravo 2 was dispatched to canvass the area, but the soil was bone dry. No tire impressions, no broken stalks, no definitive path. By Monday, July 28th, the operation intensified. The temperature soared to 97 degrees, and search teams were joined by 3 Belgian Malinois from the Davenport K9 unit. But the heat dissolved scent trails in hours. One dog briefly alerted at marker 11C, an old irrigation line checkpoint deep in the field's interior. There, under the brush, a crumpled piece of paper was found, a set list from Chalk River's last gig, partially smeared with sweat, but no fingerprints legible. That same day, the band members' families spoke to reporters from KWWL Channel 7. Mark Fallon's mother choked through her plea. "If someone is holding them, please let them go. They're not criminals. They're just kids playing music." But there were no ransom demands, no signs of foul play, no movement on any of the men's bank accounts, and not one of their pagers had pinged a tower since the night of the show. By late afternoon, the trail seemed to run cold, until 6:58 p.m., when Deputy Roush came across something strange. A trail of flattened corn, 2 wheel widths wide, curving inward toward a stand of irrigation tubing. It ran for 30 yards and then just stopped. No van, no tracks beyond that point. Just rows of corn, waving gently in the summer breeze. If 5 people vanished near your hometown, would you help search? Comment, hope, if you'd keep looking, even when the trail runs cold. Day 3 began with a rising sun and no answers. The local sheriff's office, now coordinating with the Iowa State Patrol, widened the official search radius from 10 miles to 25, extending their efforts east toward the river basin and west toward an old cluster of pre-war silos abandoned in the 1960s. Despite 2 days of boots on the ground, helicopters in the air, and dogs in the fields, not a single confirmed trace of the missing Dodge van had been recovered. But then, a civilian call changed the tone. At 9:42 a.m. on Tuesday, July 29th, a farmer named Conrad Hensley reported seeing something shiny and black lodged deep within his property's southern cornfield. Hensley, who worked over 400 acres south of Meridian, explained to deputies that he hadn't harvested the southern quadrant in over a year due to irrigation issues. The area wasn't accessible by any paved road, and the nearest easement was blocked by overgrown alfalfa. By 11:03 a.m., patrol cars from Canton and Meridian arrived at the site. But when they followed the directions and stepped into the field, there was no vehicle, no black surface, nothing metallic. Hensley scratched his head and simply muttered, "Must have been a trick of the sun." It was a dead end, or so they thought. Later that afternoon, a new clue surfaced, literally. A volunteer group from Drake University's geology department had offered to help with drone mapping. One of their drones, equipped with a low-res FLIR camera, picked up an unusual thermal void, a cold rectangular patch approximately 10 feet by 20, suggestive of dense material blocking heat. It was located near the previously reported trail of flattened corn, barely 800 feet from the initial shoe find. The land was flat and undisturbed, but something beneath the soil was disrupting thermal symmetry. The image was forwarded to authorities at 3:56 p.m. By 5:10 p.m., a dozen volunteers and 2 deputies were combing the area on foot, probing the ground with rebar poles for any sign of a void or hollow. But the earth felt compact, undisturbed. A trick of the drone, perhaps. Meanwhile, media coverage of the case exploded. The Des Moines Register ran a full-page spread. Rock band vanishes, no sign in the corn. CNN's headline news picked it up next. Footage from the Brewdog's taproom show was aired nationally. Amateur psychics began to call in. A woman from Minnesota claimed she saw the van sinking into a swamp of smoke. A man from Wichita insisted it had been taken by men in uniforms. None of it made sense. Then came a bizarre encounter. At 8:27 p.m., deputies responded to a call from a retired railroad engineer named Marty Wycliffe, who claimed he saw a kid, no more than 16, walking barefoot along Old Creek Road, carrying a red guitar case. When pressed for a description, Wycliffe said, "Tall, dark hair, eyes glazed over, looked sick, pale." Investigators thought it might have been Mark Fallon, the lead guitarist, until they remembered Mark's Stratocaster had been blue, and besides, Mark hadn't been 16 in nearly a decade, false leads stacked on top of false leads. Tirelessly, volunteers searched into the night, lit only by headlamps and distant flashes of summer lightning. But by the close of day 3, no one could explain the absence of even a trace of 5 men and a 2-ton van in a sea of open land. And just before midnight, Deputy Roosh returned to the flattened trail site. This time, he noticed something he'd missed in daylight. A strange cluster of horseflies, circling a patch of soil next to an irrigation riser. No odor, no moisture. But the insects wouldn't leave. He knelt and brushed the dirt with his gloved fingers. The soil clinked, like metal under gravel. The following morning, Wednesday, July 30th, 1997, Deputy Lyle Roush returned to the site with a shovel and a quiet sense of dread. The insects were gone, scattered by the early breeze, but the soil still bore an unnatural firmness, dense in a way that suggested it had been disturbed and repacked. Roush dug slowly, peeling away layers of hardened dirt until he hit something unmistakable, corrugated steel, rusted and dented. But it wasn't the roof of a van. It was part of an old irrigation trench cover, long since disused. Beneath it, just more dry soil, nothing else. Another false lead. By now, the case had gone viral. Morning anchors on Good Morning America called it the modern-day Roanoke of the Midwest. Local media had begun dubbing it the vanishing van. Online message boards buzzed with speculation, drug trafficking, a botched robbery, UFOs, a serial killer, all without a single shred of evidence. Then, just before noon, a witness came forward with a new, jarring story. Her name was Dina Carlisle, and she was a waitress at a diner off Route 41, about 17 miles from the last confirmed sighting. She claimed that around midnight, on the night of the band's disappearance, she served a sweaty, twitchy guy in a gas station shirt who came in rambling about losing the road and needing a fix. Dina wrote it off as another tweaker until she saw the news coverage. She was certain it was Eli "Stitch" Collins, the band's driver and roadie. "I asked him if he was okay," she told police. He said, "The corn took them. It's like it opened up. I thought he was just high, but now I don't know." Police located the diner's credit card logs. No purchase under Eli's name. No receipt left behind. Just a witness memory and a vague statement. Detectives tried tracking Eli through his probation officer, only to find out he hadn't checked in for 2 weeks. A warrant was quietly issued. Meanwhile, another witness, a trucker named Carl Dempsey, reported seeing a black van with flames turned sharply off the shoulder near mile marker 112 on I-55 around 11:45 p.m. that night. "I remember the lights went off," he said. "Just like that, gone in the dark." Investigators scrambled to cross-reference that exit with the band's expected route. It didn't match, but it also wasn't impossible. Eli had a known habit of making detours when under the influence. He'd done it once in '96, driving 2 hours the wrong way during a show run. Detectives began to entertain a new theory. Eli, possibly relapsing, took a wrong turn onto an unmarked service road. But how far could a van go without leaving a trace? And if there'd been a crash, wouldn't there be debris, broken glass, plastic, oil? But there was still nothing. That night, deputies visited Eli's apartment in Davenport. No sign of him. His landlord hadn't seen him since July 25th. Inside the unit, a crumpled flyer from Brewdog's taproom an empty suitcase, and a used syringe under the sink. No wallet, no ID, no guitar picks, just a spiral notebook with erratic handwriting. On the last page, in smeared ink, one phrase repeated 8 times: "We are under the rose." The page was torn at the corner and marked with a small, circular brown stain. By the end of that week, the case of the missing Chalk River bandmates had already begun its quiet slide into silence. With no new leads and a vanishing trail of physical evidence, the official search effort was scaled back on August 4, 1997, just 9 days after the disappearance. The cornfields, now nearing peak height, closed in tighter around every possibility. Without permission to destroy crops or bring in excavation equipment, deputies were forced to halt efforts in dozens of sectors where the van might have gone off-road. Search teams were told to focus on confirmed data zones, but there were none. The families were inconsolable. Mark Fallon's mother stopped answering calls. Denny Cross's father, a former mechanic, began driving back roads with a rented drone he didn't know how to operate, scanning the horizon every day until sundown. A vigil was held on August 9th, outside Brewdog's tap room. Over 300 people came. Someone spray-painted the club's back wall with the phrase, "Where's the band?" in white block letters. On the 1-month anniversary, the sheriff's office issued a press release simply titled, "Status Unresolved." Tips dwindled, false leads dried up. The search grid was archived. By summer's end, the physical case was reduced to 5 boxed files. One photo of Ty Sims's shoe. A Xeroxed set list recovered at Marker 11C. A napkin with the name Eli, scrawled in red pen, recovered from the diner. Drone FLIR scan printouts with thermal anomalies. The notebook from Eli's apartment. No fingerprints, no financial transactions, no remains. In early 1998, Eli Collins was declared a fugitive from probation. A federal database flag was added, but he never resurfaced. Some speculated he died in the van with the rest. Others, more darkly, whispered that Eli had fled after burying them somewhere. In the absence of fact, conspiracy filled the vacuum. The case remained cold until 2002. That year, a local radio host, Brenda Cully, launched a late-night call-in show called Cornfield Mysteries. She dedicated an entire season to the Chalk River case. Her episodes, aired weekly, included interviews with the families, the original deputies, and even the waitress who served Eli. Public interest reignited. Callers began sending in new theories. One man claimed the band had been sacrificed in an abandoned grain silo by a local cult. A woman mailed in a map with red X's marked along irrigation lines, insisting the van had been driven underground. Another said they had visions of Mark Fallon screaming in a van with no windows. Though none of these tips could be verified, one recurring detail kept surfacing: the cornfields themselves, that something beneath them, or within them, had taken the band. On July 26, 2003, exactly 6 years later, family and fans organized a memorial show in Des Moines. The surviving members of a once-rival band played a set in Chalk River's honor. At the end, Denny's sister walked on stage and held up a worn flannel shirt once owned by her brother. "I don't want to memorialize them," she said. "I want to find them." If your loved one vanished without a trace, would you stop looking after 1 year? Or 5? Comment never if you'd search until the truth clawed its way back from the soil. That night, a storm swept across eastern Iowa. Flash floods hit 3 counties. The next morning, a farmer in DeWitt discovered a stretch of corn collapsed in a perfect rectangle, like something heavy had once been there and had shifted. By the time the case passed its 8th year without resolution, most believed it would never be solved. The Chalk River mystery had faded into folklore, referenced in local ghost tours and high school urban legends. But in late September 2005, an internal audit of dormant cases within the Iowa State Cold Case Unit flagged the band's file for unusual characteristics: 5 adult males missing, no evidence of foul play, and a vehicle that had apparently evaporated in daylight. A junior investigator named Denise Arlo, just 2 months into her assignment, asked a simple question that nobody had seriously considered before. What if the van wasn't stolen or hidden? What if it was still exactly where it vanished, just buried or overgrown? She compiled a new report, not with new evidence, but with missing steps. Dozens of areas marked inaccessible due to crop coverage were never excavated, especially around irrigation line 11C, where the set list and heat anomaly had been found. Her request for ground-penetrating radar was denied due to cost, but she persisted. With the support of a state-funded legal evidence re-evaluation grant, Arlo reopened the file on October 3, 2005, nearly to the day 8 years after the initial flyer was printed. She began with the map. The original search grid had included sections of farmland that were privately owned and never properly entered, only walked along fence lines. Several were managed by a now-deceased tenant farmer named Victor Halley, whose paperwork revealed a long-forgotten field lease in an area just east of DeWitt Reservoir. The field had since been repurposed for no-till corn rotation, meaning the ground hadn't been deeply turned since 1996, the year before the disappearance. Arlo reached out to the current landholder, Glenn Roche, who agreed to let her walk the land, provided she didn't disturb the crops. But it was October, harvest season. The ground would be churned soon. On October 19, 2005, Arlo observed as Glenn's mechanical plow team began tearing up the southern stretch of the lot. That evening, she scribbled a note in her field log. Observation. 1 quadrant feels like compacted ground. No rock drift, no silt. Feels fake. But she wasn't the only one watching. A local blogger, Jade Limmer, who had covered Cornfield mysteries in its heyday, caught wind of the reopened case. Limmer began posting drone footage of the field operations and theorizing that the band had slipped through a hole in the map. Her posts gained traction, even prompting a late-night email from a private investigator in Illinois who claimed he had data on the van's model behavior after metal fatigue. Arlo filed that email under noise, but the pressure mounted. Eyes were back on the story. Then came the conspiracy wave. Some residents began blaming the state. A few whispered that Chalk River had been black-bagged for accidentally witnessing something near the grain terminals. An anonymous post on an image board alleged that the band was murdered and buried beneath agriculture equipment storage pits. Another source said the men were seen alive in Kansas in 2001, playing under different names. Arlo, despite the noise, stayed focused on the land. Her strategy was simple. Look for the blind spots in the original sweep. Focus on what wasn't looked at. On October 28th, her persistence paid off. One of the harvesting tractors stalled over what the farmer thought was a slab of stone, but it rang hollow. The soil around it was dense, heat-packed, and unusually hard. The farmer flagged Arlo immediately. She made a note in her logbook. Possible object below irrigation trench. Buried under shallow compaction. No surface disruption. Requesting sonar. And as night fell over the cornfield, the machinery stood still, headlights casting long shadows over something just beneath the dirt, something wide, rectangular, and cold. The field where the harvest stalled was quiet at dawn. On October 29, 2005, Denise Arlo returned with a borrowed piece of equipment, a Noggin Smart Cart GPR system on loan from the University of Iowa's Civil Engineering Department. The device, typically used for pavement surveys, had been outfitted with a 250 MHz antenna, suitable for detecting large voids or dense objects within 5 to 6 feet below the surface. With state approval pending for full excavation, Arlo walked the grid by hand, scanning every square yard around the stall point logged by the tractor team. Within 40 minutes, the unit pinged something, a rectilinear echo pattern, consistent with a large object buried less than 4 feet deep. The signal bounced sharply at the corners and returned dense material readings across a 17.8-foot length and 7.1-foot width. Arlo froze. It matched the exact footprint of a 1979 Dodge Ram van. She made 3 calls, one to the sheriff's department, one to the state cold case unit, and one to the university lab requesting assistance for sonar cross-verification. The farm was locked down by 3:00 p.m. A Kongsberg EM2040 multi-beam sonar unit mounted to a custom cart was brought in the next morning, October 30th, 2005. This time, the signal left no doubt. The outline of a vehicle was unmistakable. Full chassis, 2 axles, long rectangular body. At 11:48 a.m., Arlo entered a simple note in her logbook. We found it. Excavation permits were rushed through, and by October 31st, Halloween morning, a quiet team of forensic techs began digging. The soil, compacted and dry, took longer to clear than expected. At 4:16 p.m., a glint of black paint appeared under the last layer of dirt. Minutes later, the rusted flame decals came into view. The Dodge van was there, buried under just under 46 inches of hardened Iowa earth. The windshield was intact, the doors sealed. Deputies surrounded the scene. They waited for evidence techs to arrive before opening it. A GoPro Hero 2 camera, jury-rigged to a flexible pole, was fed through a small break in the side window. The footage was streamed in real time to a laptop nearby. The inside was dark, still, and full. All 4 rear seats were occupied. Skeletal remains sat slumped in place. On the floor, what appeared to be a 5th body, curled between the pedals. Arlo stepped back and covered her mouth. On the dash, a pack of Black Cat rolling papers lay open beside a burned spoon. A rusted heroin kit, tourniquet, syringe, and bent bottle cap had slipped between the seats. Each man had a full water bottle beside him. None opened. The van had no external crash marks, no deployed airbags, and no evidence it had flipped. But the cabin had become a coffin, sealed in heat. Forensic pathologists would later estimate internal cabin temperatures exceeded 136 degrees Celsius for several hours that night. One by one, the bodies were bagged. Preliminary ID tags were attached based on dental records, clothing, and personal items. One had a leather bracelet inscribed Thai. Another wore a stage tee from Brewdogs. The driver's seat bore shallow scratch marks along the window. He may have tried to get out, or hallucinated he was trapped long before the engine died. The press conference was scheduled for the next morning. If a single mistake could erase 5 lives, wouldn't you want the world to hear how? Comment truth if you believe it always finds a way to surface. On November 1st, 2005, crews unearthed a rusted 1979 Dodge Ram van buried under less than 4 feet of Iowa soil. Inside were the skeletal remains of all 5 bandmates. Driver Eli Collins had overdosed in the front seat. The others died locked inside, victims of heat stroke. The cabin reached 136 degrees. No one escaped, no signs of foul play. The van had slipped into a shallow dip in the field, invisible from air or road. Within days, corn regrew over the trail. For 8 years, they were less than 300 feet from the last clue. At the press conference, Sheriff Marla Dyrek said, "It wasn't murder. It wasn't a cover-up. It was a tragic accident, and we missed it." On November 5th, a memorial was held. The crowd stood silent as lyrics from Leave the Lights On were read aloud. The band was finally home.